Yes, so I welcome you all to the Africa Altar webinar. It's a very special webinar because it's our first webinar in the year 2026, and this is the month of January. We're starting the year really, really strong, and I'm really excited to have you all here to join us in our January webinar. Thank you so very much. And with us here today to lead us in this webinar is Dr. Kate Mastruserio Raynolds. So we are going to be introducing her to you shortly. And I also have here with me members of the PD committee. I have here with me Dancing Kimathi and I have Letitia Akabutu with me as well. We are going to proceed with today's webinar, and this webinar is being recorded, so I would like us to pay attention. Please keep your mics muted. We'll take questions at the end, and you could please leave your questions in the chat for us to take them after the presentation. Right now, we are going to introduce our speaker for today, and I'm going to hand over to Dancing Kimathi to read out her bio. Over to you, Dancing. Thank
Thank
you.
you very much, Blessing. Dr. Kate Mastruserio Raynolds is a professor of TESOL and literacy at Central Washington University. A licensed K-12 educator, she has taught teachers and multilingual learners of English in public schools at elementary, middle, and universities in various contexts. She specializes in language and content integrated instruction, instructional methodology, and teacher education. Dr. Reynolds' scholarly works include decentering advocacy in English language teaching, that is on global perspectives and local practices, introduction to TESOL, becoming a language teaching professional, and K-12 classroom research in language teaching and learning on narratives for understanding and engaging in teacher research. She was honored to serve in the TESOL International Association's Board of Directors, that is in the year 2022 to 2025. So, ladies and gentlemen, let us welcome Kate Reynolds to take us through the next step. Thank you very much. Welcome, Kate.
Thank you so much, Dancing, blessing the whole Africa ELT crew. I really appreciate it. I'm honored to be here with you. So today I'll be speaking about needs assessment. So let me get my presentation up here so you all can see it. It will take 1 second to share this. Okay, so let me see one more thing. Now you can't see you can see the whole presentation, but not the speaker's notes, correct? Yes, or do you see the speaker's notes?
We can see the slides, we can see the speaker's notes.
Oh, okay, good. So you can, or you can't.
I think I can't see from my side.
You can't see from your side. Good, I'm hoping. Okay, so I've only got it on my laptop. Normally I have two screens. So again, thank you everyone for having me here. I'll be speaking today on the topic of needs assessments, where to begin instruction, designing needs assessment to determine students' abilities. So I want to share with you a story first before I begin of a time when I was teaching in an elementary English classroom in the United States. And it was a summer school program, and I only had 6 weeks with these students. And so I needed to know very quickly what I needed to work on, as I'm sure some of you can relate to. And what I did was I created a needs assessment to find out what my students' abilities were, what their interests were, what their motivation was. And I conducted in the first day that we were together. And I found out the most interesting things. I found out that there was this one little boy who was a huge reader. He loved reading everything. And I found out that there was another child who was a wonderful writer. She loved writing. She wrote journals for fun. So, and finally, I found out there was this one who was just incredibly bright, and she could engage with material like I hadn't seen students at that age before. And it really helped guide my work with those students. I was able to all of the students, of course, but with those specific students, I was really able to capitalize on what they loved to do, what they were really good at, and tailor instruction to their needs and interests. So, what would you like to know before you teach your language learners, before you begin to teach them? A common teaching dilemma we have is, where do I start with my instruction of the students? We want to know what interests they have, right? Would they like this topic or not? What language skills do they have? What are they particularly good at? What can I capitalize on? And which skills do I need to do more work with? We can when we give them some sort of activity to start with, that might not be good enough. I was told when I was at a very famous intensive English program, and this is working with university students, to give them some sort of speaking activity. And that wasn't maybe planned enough to do a really good needs assessment. So what we want to do is we want to be systematic in our gathering of data about the students so we can determine quality and in a reliable way what we need to be doing with them. So uncertainty in this process is quite normal. It's very normal. It is not a failure to feel like you don't know where to start, or you don't really even know where to begin to create a needs assessment. So that's what I'm here to help with. Okay, my slides are not wanting to advance very quickly. Okay, there we go. So what is a needs assessment? What's the purpose for us? What is it used for? Who creates? Blessing, did you need to say something?
So, Dr.
I can't hear you.
Lights, because we're kind of seeing two things at the same time on the screen. I think you're
Okay,
the next
that's what
icon
I
is
asked
not.
earlier. I can get rid of the speaker's notes. That's what I was asking. Okay. Okay, here you go. So we're just going to do this without the speaker's notes. Okay, so what is a needs assessment? What is it used for? How does it help teachers, and who creates them? Where can you find them? So a needs assessment basically looks like activities we would conduct in the classroom, and or you might even think of them as activities that we're going to assess. So because we have a systematic way of gathering the information that the students can produce for us. So they don't look like tests. They look like ways that we're engaging the students early on in the class. And if we do them right, then we can make them look like a series of get to know you activities. So the students don't have a lot of stress and they feel like they're able to perform the best they can. So we don't necessarily let them know that this is a needs assessment. So they're used to help us figure out where we can start with our instruction, and helps us with things like groupings, grouping students who have similar proficiency areas where we could work with one set of students, one group of students who might need to work on their reading in comparison to grouping across proficiency levels, which helps some students but might not help all students. Sometimes the students in a mixed proficiency group will rely on the students who do well, and they might not perform as well. So there are different ways that groupings in the classroom can help our learners, so we can choose better how to group students because of the information in a needs assessment. And who creates them? Well, this is the interesting thing. Teachers generally create their needs assessments. These are not things usually created by publishers. And where can you find them is a big question if they were to be created. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about that in a few minutes. So let's talk about research-informed guidelines for creating needs assessments. Needs assessments should be context sensitive, meaning sensitive to the area in which you find yourselves. Okay, so what kind of things are happening in your specific local context? They should be regular and ongoing. So we're kind of touching base and checking where students are pretty regularly in order to maybe modify groupings, for example, and to modify our instruction. And they're instructionally useful because they help us plan appropriately for the students that we have in our classrooms. They're a source of data collection. We can collect data that will help us balance language skills. So maybe we'll realize that students need more writing than they're getting. And so we can maybe plan for more writing activities and instruction. We can focus on learner goals. What do they want to accomplish in a given class or in their school or in their schooling? And they can tell us about learners' second language learning strategies, which is very important for us to know if they're using good language learning strategies. A lot of research by Rebecca Oxford and others have shown that learning strategies can assist us with building our own language skills. So when we know what students' learning strategies are, we can see, oh, they're not using these strategies that might be more effective in certain situations for them. I think I'm getting a sore throat. It's all gravelly. In low resource contexts, oral and observational methods are valid and powerful. And this is according to TESOL International Association. So in contexts where we don't have a lot of materials or we can't do a lot of printouts, for example, we might do more oral language focus and observe what the students are able to do. And that's okay. That is completely and fine. Okay, so what information do teachers actually need about language learners? Well, I love this picture, by the way. What teachers need is they need information about the learners speaking, listening, reading, and writing. But they also need to know about things like, what grammar are they really able to use? Have had, assuming that they have had instruction before, what grammar are they able to use? What grammar are they still working on? Grammar points. How is their pronunciation? Are there certain things that I need to focus on there? We might even look at things like spelling. We can look at learning strategies. There's a famous learning strategy inventory. We can find out about our learners' motivation. That helps a lot too. We can find out which students are very motivated, and we don't have to focus on motivating them per se. And then we can find the students who are less motivated and work on their motivation, right? We can look at the communicative competencies, linguistic, discourse level, sociocultural, and organizational actional to find out maybe about students' ability to read and write longer passages, or to engage in polite conversation and use politeness strategies. So there's a lot of information that teachers can use about language learners that make things more effective. So there are some ways to gather that information. And we're going to look at some of the ways to gather that information. But by and large, we're talking about tasks, conducting tasks and activities in our classrooms to see what students are able to do, using some surveys if we have access to printouts, or we could write a survey on the board and have students write it down on a piece of paper for us. We can do presentations. We can do all kinds of other data gathering. One of the things I really journaling, they can do journaling. One of the things I really like to do is ask students to talk do a piece of talking for me that's not planned, that's not scripted, on something like what their future goals are. So I can find out about their future goals, but I can also listen to their pronunciation. And the beautiful thing is there are a lot of free apps to do that. So you can have students do this for homework, and you can receive that information and analyze that information and find out what the student's able really to do in their speaking. So there are tons of ways to do this. It doesn't mean that we have to constantly hand out papers. So let's talk about some of those tools. The first thing to know about needs assessment is that professionally published needs assessment are difficult to find. There are very few professionally published needs assessments, and that's because they are context sensitive, as I previously mentioned. They need to be specific to a location and a grade level, and the target. Is this language only, or is this content and language? Does it need to have a specific goal focus? So there are a lot of specifics that make it very difficult to find professionally published needs assessments. More difficult is to find a diagnostic, something that says that this is what the students can do and this is what the students need to do. There are very few publishers that have built in diagnostics into their resource tools. And so that's something that if there is some savvy tech person out there and you want to develop these, you could probably do quite well with it. So I want to mention too, before we proceed, that these are sources of ideas and not requirements. Okay, so you're not required to do all of these things, but this might spur your thinking about something like, maybe I do need to find out these things. So here are some examples of some of the needs assessment tools that I have seen and that are available. Okay. The first one are interest inventories. And that's an interest inventory is just basically finding out what your students' interests are. So what I use them for is to find out what topics in the course my students are going to be particularly interested in. So if there's a topic that I find the students really don't want to talk about, maybe they've talked about it way too many times. I don't know, marriage and family. Maybe they felt like they've talked about this too many times. Then I try to find a different topic that might work in its place, but still do the same sorts of learning in terms of grammar and instruction that they need to do. So I usually make my interest inventories not super wide open, but specific to the topics of the class. You might find that your interest inventories are best in a much more general way. The next category are things called home language surveys, and these are very common in the United States. Again, this is not a prescription. These are ideas. So home language surveys, they show what language the student speaks at home most of the time, or which languages, and what sort of materials the student has available. Are they doing a lot of reading in a language at home? The next category is the strategy inventory for language learners called the SIL, and it's by Rebecca Oxford, and it's about their strategies, their language learning strategies. I'm going to show you examples of all of these in a second. There are surveys of learning strategies and learning styles or motivation as well. So there are many different types of surveys along those lines. And then finally, one of my favorite resources, one of my favorite books of all time, Well Said. In the beginning of Well Said, it's a pronunciation textbook. It has a needs assessment as chapter 1. So the learners do chapter 1 with you, and you gather all the information you need to teach them the materials in the book and find out exactly what they need to work on. And it helps target for them what areas they need to focus on during the instruction using that book. So I'm going to show you a couple selections from these items. So the first thing I mentioned was an interest inventory. And you'll notice here there are a couple different kinds. What's your favorite activity at school? What's my least favorite subject? What do I do in my spare time? What is my short-term goal for this year? What do you hope to learn this year? Rate some of the following interests: dance, drama, writing, computers, social studies, world languages, music, sports, math, science, business, politics, and law. And what are your favorite games or sports? And then this one on the bottom of the right-hand one says, I hope to improve my. Okay, so this is just a survey that you could give to your students. This is something you could put up on a board. It doesn't need to necessarily be in print, but oftentimes teachers do have them printed 1 or 2 pages, so back to back. But that depends on the resource you have in your community and your school. Here's another interest inventory. Welcome to the class student survey. And you'll notice this one focuses more on language. For example, in this course, what do you want to focus on? Listening, pronunciation, reading, vocabulary. What is your English level now? And describe describe challenges you have when learning English. Does somebody need something?
No, please go ahead. Sorry about that. I muted the person already. Please go ahead.
Okay. I just didn't know if you were trying to tell me something. And what are your plans after finishing this English course? Do you plan to go to college? Do you have a career, a study for yourself? So you can see that this one focuses a lot on the kinds of things that they want to learn. The next category I mentioned to you is a home language survey. And these are very official in the United States. So the first one on the left is from the state of Rhode Island, and the second one is from Wisconsin. And you'll notice that they ask questions about the home language, the language most often spoken, when they started acquiring their first language, languages your child understands, speaks, reads, writes. Let's see if there's a different one on the other side. Oh, what language does a child speak to his or her brothers or sisters most of the time? What languages do they speak to their friends in most of the time? So this is a way for the school to understand more about the language learner. So if you have a school, like some of the schools I saw in Cameroon that were high schools and focus exclusively on language, then I'm sorry, that's a little distracting. I'm going to try to mute him. Can't seem to do it. Okay, well, maybe somebody can mute him. Anyway, so if your school was a language school, you might find that it's a good idea to have a school home language survey that the parents complete, and you learn more about what the student is doing with language at home and what their skills are. Here are some other ones. They don't say what state they're from, but there are other home language surveys. You can see that generally they ask the same questions: home language, strong language, what do they communicate in most of the time. Now, as promised, the strategy inventory for language learning, this SIL. So this is by Rebecca Oxford again, and she gathers background information first. How long have you been studying? You notice these are very similar to home language survey. Home language surveys grew out of work like Rebecca Oxford's, because every teacher kind of needs to know what the background of the home language is before starting with kids. So, or university students. So you'll notice too, what are their interests? And what do they hope to use the language for? So there are many different types of questions here that pull from some of the other ones, or the other ones pulled from this, as you will, because this is a very early version of it. So this is the background part of it. Then there are pages that look like this, and this is the best copy I could get for you. I did all I could because they're an older version. They're from '89, but this is a valid tool for finding out what your students' language learning strategies are. And there are several sets of questions. It's long. You'd have to be able to print it out, or they'd need to be able to take it online and maybe answer on a piece of paper. You could probably put one up online. This is something that you could do a Google search on and find the whole survey and use it with your class, maybe put it up online for them and have them complete it at home and bring in the information for you. And it tells what categories they're strongest in. So it'll tell you if their memory strategies are very strong in English, or if they're really good at using circumlocution, right, to talk around a point when they're missing a vocabulary word, for example, or if they ask for help when they're talking to someone, but they can't remember how to express an idea. So it's actually a very useful tool if you're able to work on your learning strategies. So I promised other learning styles, learning strategy surveys, and motivation surveys. All of these links work. And you'll notice that the first category are learning styles. So this is, do you rely more on global thinking, or are you a very process-oriented person? So it kind of helps determine those sorts of things, which might not have direct bearing unless you're going to be working with a student long-term. The second category are learning strategies. These are general but not language-specific learning strategies. That might help you overall. The LASSI, the second one, is particularly interesting in terms of looking at learning strategies. And then finally, the motivation strategies. I was very excited about these. The first one, self-determinationtheory.org's intrinsic motivation inventory. You might recall that intrinsic motivation is stronger than extrinsic motivators, things like grades or winning something in the classroom or a piece of candy, right? That the motivation that comes from the inside of the learners is much more important. So you could find out how motivated your learners are if you wanted to use these tools. And by the way, you're thinking to yourself, I don't have time to write down all of these URLs. It's true. I will be sending out, I think Blessing in the professional development team will be sending out these slides so you can look all of these up. And then the chapter from my favorite book, Well Said by Linda Grant. The publisher has changed. It used to be Heinley and Heinley. Now I think it's Pearson. But you can still find this book. It's in the 4th or 5th edition. But basically you have your pronunciation profile. You read a paragraph, then you read a short response interview question, and then you do a peer introduction of somebody else. And that's all recorded. And you can use those online recording tools or an app. So the paragraph reading you see here, they read this short paragraph, and then there are the interview questions, and then the peer response. Then it has your needs, attitudes, assessments. So how do you feel about giving a short presentation? How do you feel about giving a long one? Are you good at this? Are you weaker at this? And it has several more pages that are part of the book. So actually, personally, if you have an opportunity to get a copy of this book from a publisher rep, ask them for a copy because it's so helpful. Even if you don't use this book as your main book in your classroom, I use it for all the rules in the book, because you can look up specifically what rules, and they give you wonderful learner-facing rules that you can work on with your students about pronunciation. But I would also use the pronunciation profile as a needs assessment. So those are the ones that generally are out there. They're free. They are published, if you will. And like I said, here's another page of the Linda Grant Needs and Attitudes Assessment. Okay, but generally, they're not available in published format. Not the kinds of things that we need to know about speaking, listening, reading, and writing. And specifically, not much out there on grammar and vocabulary. So let's talk about design. What works in needs assessments and analysis? The first step in our design is, what do we already know about the students? That is really a key thing. If we have any sort of information from the previous teacher or from a test result, we can use that information to start us with our thinking about our groups of students. The second step is, what data do you need to gather? So we can then focus in what we are going to create for our needs assessment. The third step, in what ways can you gather that data simply? We don't want to have a big production. We don't want it to take a lot of our instructional time. We don't want it to be expensive. We don't want it to have to, create a lot of materials. How can we do it simply? So then we look at those ways. Step 4, how to format your needs assessment. First section is usually personal questions and background, interest, inventories, that sort of thing. The second section is usually the activities that you're going to use to gather the data. So if I'm going to have students if I want to know about their speaking, I'm going to have them do some speaking, just like you saw in the Linda Grant one, where she has them do 3 different speaking activities: the paragraph reading, the short response interview question, and the peer introduction. The paragraph reading is interesting because it's one way that you can look systematically at certain things in their pronunciation, right? So you could look at things like the second line, they imitate, repeat, and sing. So in intonation, it goes up on imitate, repeat, and then it falls on sing. So she's particularly created the situation where a lot of the things that need to be worked on are in this paragraph, and that you can look at all students on the same paragraph. But the short responses and the peer introductions are much more open-ended, and you can find out in an open-ended way where the students' strengths are and the needs. Step 5, how to implement your needs assessment and analyze your data. That's an important thing. Like, how and when do you do it? How do you analyze your data once you have it? And then step 6, reflect and revise after your teaching begins, because you might need to redo aspects of it. You might find that there are areas that can be tweaked and improved. Needs assessments are not perfect tools. They're not generally validated. They are generally a way to gather data in a quick way to start us on the road to good instruction. So let's look at steps 1 and 2. Areas to consider for data gathering. First, we write a description of the data that we already have: the age, the placement information, the schooling experiences, the languages. That way we know for each student where we're starting. And this doesn't have to be a lot. It might be that if you're looking at a class of 30 students or 60 students, because I know sometimes in Africa you have really big classes, you might see that they're all the same age, roughly. You might find that one is not the same age. So if you put them in a spreadsheet, you could literally, and with all of their names, you could literally write the same age and then just fix a couple of them that are different. Placement information. That could be something that's quickly added in a spreadsheet. So you notice right away, I'm talking about systems for keeping that data together and making it easy, because those systems really do matter in simplifying the process for you. The second part B, choose the areas you think you need to learn more about in terms of your specific learners. Do you need to know their interests, their listening, their speaking, their reading? We noticed with the Linda Grant Well Said book, it's just pronunciation, right? Communicative competencies, learning strategies and styles, academic or study skills. So what are we focusing in on? It can be combinations of these things. It doesn't have to be just one line. It could be interests and writing. So you could focus on the kinds of interests they want to write about, for example. And then we write our assessment objectives. These assessment objectives can be very broad, but and they don't have to be written in a specific format. I usually write to collect data on learners' impromptu speaking abilities on social topics. So what I'm cueing in on there, impromptu, not planned. So they don't have a moment to pre-think what their speaking is going to be on, because we're going to get a much more authentic speaking ability in an impromptu assessment. And if we want them to focus on speaking social topics, because our course is on social topics and not academic topics, then we want to focus in on those. Or to gather a sample of learners' grammar, vocabulary, presentation ideas or arguments, cohesion and formatting and formal writing. Whatever that is, we can focus in. This is going to help us create a target so we stay true to what we need to do. So we write out what we're interested. I write one or two goals or objectives for my assessments to make sure I'm just staying focused. So when we create the needs assessment, and I think this is the biggest part of what we need to talk about, is we're thinking of activities to gather the data. And right away, when I started talking, you probably thought she's talking a lot about data, but this is all about data. This is all about getting enough information from our learners. And that is just the data that we need to work with, that we have to work with. It's wonderful that we get to work. So based on your assessment objectives, choose or create activities to gather a variety of data. For example, you might find a listening or a reading passage or passages, and you create questions for students to answer about the passage. For example, true and false, multiple choice, fill in the blank, question and answer. And when we're doing this, we want to give students multiple opportunities to show what they know. So sometimes we'll give a couple different reading comprehension passages or a couple different listening passages. And we give both close-ended types of questions like true, false, and multiple choice, fill in the blank, that has basically one right answer, and more open-ended opportunities like question and answer or sentence completion, where there's much more openness in the response that's possible. That way, we get to see in a less controlled way what they can do. And that's very similar to the impromptu speaking. We want to give them the kind of controlled environment and the less controlled environment so we can find out what they can really do. We can ask questions that have concrete information from the passage, as well as inferential questions. So with listening and reading, it's very important to get the concrete information because they need to know how to listen for specifics, right? That's one of the micro skills of listening. And they need to be able to find inferential information that's kind of between the lines that you kind of have to understand from the context, because that is a high level listening and reading skill. And to be able to infer shows that they have a higher ability. If we don't ask at least one inferential question, we won't know if they're working at a higher level. We'll just know that what they can do at this level. We won't know if they can go to a higher level with the listening and the reading passages. So while it might seem like a strange thing to have there, it helps find out what our top end is. So this is the page I have for you about activities to gather data on speaking and writing. So speaking and writing are open-ended, whereas, and they're productive. Right. So we know with listening and reading, they're receiving information and we have to find out what's going on in their brains. Right. So we have to give them information to show what they've understood. And that's a little tricky. But with speaking and writing, we have to gather the production. Writing is wonderful because they're writing something down. They can write it on a piece of paper and you can take that paper. It's so much easier to gather that data. But with speaking, we need to capture that data in a recording if possible. We can do it if we're observing them, like everybody gives a short impromptu introduction speech. You could do it then, or you could have them do it in a recording. One of the things about using yourself as the observation tool is it's very exhausting, especially when you have a lot of learners you have to work with over a series of days to have them do a short impromptu speech so you can see it. And that would be really hard if you had a really large class. So using a free tool for them to record that you can see is much better. It's more efficient. You can do the assessment part and check things that you're hearing and assess it a lot easier when you've got it already recorded. You could rewind and listen again and see those sorts of things. So those are a couple things to know about the differences in the skills, and speaking and writing are very unique in that. So when we create speaking and writing prompts, it requires the students to produce enough language so you can see what they can do in their speaking and their writing. You can use communicative activities like interviews or information gaps or role plays. You can have them perform them. Again, you're the observational tool, so keep that in mind. You can have them do spontaneous, impromptu, or planned speaking activities or writing activities. A planned writing activity would be something like, okay, I'm going to ask you to write on this topic tomorrow. Give it a think overnight and see what you want to write about, and start planning out some of the ideas that you have. Whereas an impromptu or a planned speaking activity would be similar, like I'm going to have you talk on, and this is a conversation question from the top of that. What was the last funny video you saw? And that's great because it would put you in the past tense. They'd have to talk about and use the past tense. But then you could have them speak on that. But if you had them plan it, they could plan to use the past tense better. So remember to have a way to record what students have said, if at all possible. So your final product. Step 4, the formatting of the final product. In the first section, we have the personal questions, the past study. Make sure you find out when, where, how long. The goals for your tutorial or for your class. Learning strategy, styles, interest inventory, those kind of formatting. Second part is the activity you're going to use to gather the data. Place all the activities and tasks you will give to the students into a section so you have them in one place. Don't have a bunch of different files, or keep them all in the same folder if you're going to keep them as separate files. Be sure to write directions on each activity so the students know what the directions are, and give them a model, if at all possible, so they know how to answer it. So they've seen some sort of example. Number each item and provide lines to write on, enough white space. Keep it clean, not a lot of things on it. And make sure your directions are clear and intelligible to our non-native speaker friends. So that's part of the formatting that we need to know. The third section is the administrator and proctor pages. And we need to have our assessment objectives there, a listening transcript. So using online listening passages are wonderful because you can often get a transcript created right for you. So you don't have to write up a transcript. So you can take your transcript from the video and put it right into your administrator and proctor pages. You can have your answer key for the different close-ended types of activities. You can have your rubrics for speaking and writing, so you can systematically and easily grade the speaking and the writing. And if you have any references or works cited for the listening and reading passages or visuals, speaking and writing prompts, all of that should probably be in there as well. So let's talk about, I know I'm running short on time, so let's talk about some practical guidelines for implementing needs assessment. Embed needs assessments into normal lessons. Do not stop teaching to assess. It should look to the students like it's regular teaching. Use regular classroom activities and observe how they act. Keep it short and time-bound. Limit needs assessments to 1 to 2 class periods maximum, right? We don't want to be stretching out needs assessment into weeks. And keep the individual activities pretty short, 5 to 15 minutes each. If it takes more time than 1 week to finish, it's probably too much. You're doing too much in your needs assessment. It'll be really hard for you to organize all of the data that you'd get. 3, reduce the cognitive load. That means how hard it is in terms of thinking. And the emotional load for students. The emotional load is that feeling like, oh my gosh, I have to perform so well since this is an assessment. That's why we often don't tell students that needs assessments are assessments. We try to keep them just doing their best. We tell them, just do your best. And that way it reduces their anxiety, the emotional stress. So give students or give examples before tasks, like a model of what it should look like so students know what they're going for. Limit instruction to 1 to 2 steps, if possible, the directions given. Allow the use of home language if needed, especially for goals and background. It's not a problem if they do that. And say out loud, do your best. This helps me understand how to teach you. Take simple notes, not detailed scores. Use brief notes, not complex rubrics. I would use holistic rubrics to make sure that, 1-point rubrics where you can quickly put people on a scale. For example, strong speaker, limited vocabulary, understands main ideas, but misses some of the details. Those are good notes to keep when you're observing. That way you get quick information and you're not writing out complex information. Share results in a very positive general way. Do not label an individual student publicly at all. That's only going to make them feel horrible for the remainder of your time with the student. Share group patterns. That's okay. And you notice I emphasize group patterns, not scores. And you can say things like, I noticed there's some excellent writers in this classroom. You all do very well at paragraph construction, for example. Or many of you are strong speakers, but we will work more on listening this term because they're strong speakers, right? So those are some of my tips for needs assessments, and I hope you found them helpful. Needs assessments really will help you in so many ways, and I hope that this has given you some ideas that you can take away and implement. Needs assessments will help you plan your instruction for your students better. They help target instruction, focusing it to the kinds of specific things you need to focus on and not worrying so much about the things the students already do that are awesome. They actually save time. You take a little time at the beginning of the term, but you're not doing some of the other things that are time consuming that you're just drudging through, even though the students already know this information and can do it. It empowers the teacher, it empowers you. It improves learner trust. They trust you more because they know that one, you know them, and two, you care about them and their individual learning. And it positions you as the decision maker as opposed to some textbook company where you're just following what the textbook says. And it is definitely worth the effort because you're going to see your students do so much better, even better than you can possibly imagine. So thank you for your attention. I want to thank Blessing and Carson and the whole professional development team at ELTA, Africa ELTA. I'm so grateful for you all attending, and I would love to answer any questions you might have.
Wow, amazing. Thank you so very much, Dr. Kate. Wow, that was truly amazing. I can tell that everyone here has gained something new. And like I said, while we were discussing sometime last week, that this is just the best time for teachers to hear about this topic. Starting the school, this is January. So for many of us, we're just starting the school year, resuming school after the holiday. And it's so important to take all of these points that you have shared with us today very seriously. Needs assessment is just like you said, it saves time and it helps the teacher to be focused. It helps the learners, the students to trust their teachers because you know them, instead of just, coming straight ahead, assessing them or giving them things that are not relevant. You've taken your time to study them properly using all of these strategies that you shared with us today. You know, take the needs assessment to know what is their entry level. What are they coming with? What have they got within them? Because no child comes to class or to school empty. So that is why needs assessment is very important. Thank you so much for sharing all of these. I've been trying to check through the chat and I'm yet to see any question. But I know that those of us here today and right
Hello,
now watching,
Blythe. There's a
yes.
question in the chat from
Oh,
Mariam.
great. Okay,
Yeah,
great. Please
from
go ahead.
Mariam.
Please go
Mm-hmm.
ahead, Letitia.
So she wants to know if the needs assessment can be done orally.
Absolutely. Absolutely, it can be done orally. So you can have questions. Let's say you wanted to find out about their speaking. Maybe you would give them a question to talk about in a pair, and you could walk around and observe, and you notice the real short little notes like, oh, very, very good at speaking, or hesitates a lot, seems unsure, uncertain of themselves, that sort of thing. So yes, you can totally do it. And in terms of writing, even if you want the students to write, you could have them write on their own paper. When I was in Cameroon, I saw students all had their notebooks, right? And the teacher wrote questions on the board. So you could write a question on the board and then say, okay, here's the question. You could say it out loud, and students can then write about that question. So ask them to write about their favorite adventure, whatever that is. Or if you're doing content-based instruction, you might have them write about something like I don't know, something they love about science, right? If you were teaching a science content class. So yeah, all of it can be modified to make it oral. And that's one of the things that we have to know is that it's all modifiable for the context.
Exactly. And
And
just to add to what
slide
you
to
just said, yes.
yes.
Um, yeah, some people when we hear assessments, we always think it has to be, a very formal setting. Needs assessment can take place in an informal setting in your classroom. So it could be already like you just said, it could be in a relaxing mode, like if you're taking young learners, for example. So it doesn't have to be a very rigorous process, typed out questions and all of that. It might be, very informal discussion, presentations, like you showed us the templates of pictures, talking about speaking, prompting them to speak through pictures and all of those things. So needs assessments could be very informal. Yeah. And I have a question
Can see,
now in the chat from, mhm,
I was going to
yeah,
say,
from
it can
Hadi.
seem to the students as a just get to know you sort of
Yeah,
series of activities. And it doesn't have to come across as one of the standardized tests that they have to take that are really important for their grades. It's because if we put that kind of pressure on, the students are going to have anxiety about the assessment, and they're probably going to produce less quality language for you.
exactly. And it can even bring up fear of failure. So when it's more casual, especially at the beginning of the session of the year like this, it makes them relax, it makes them free, and you really get to know who they are and their actual needs. Yeah. So I have
Yes.
one other question from the chat that says, this is from Hadija that says, can this be applicable in a large classroom? I think you mentioned that during your presentation.
Yes. So I was in Cameroon twice in the last year, doing some work with teachers, and I saw several classes with about 70, 75 students in them apiece. And what I might do in that situation, I might I might kind of set up groupings, just random groupings. The students who sit up in this area, they're group A. This is group B. This is group C, and then I think I might give different activities like this. These groups are going to have a writing activity, and I'm going to do a speaking something with this other group, and then these ones are going to do this reading activity and so forth and so on. And I would move that around until I got to work with every group on the speaking, just so I'm getting one-on-one to see what they can do with the speaking, because generally that's where we are the ones to do the observation if we can't record it. But again, if you can record it, use one of the free online they have tons of different apps. One of them is like Speaking Thread or something like that. Thread up something. Anyway, if you can have them do it online as homework, that's even better if they'll do their homework. If not, you can have them do it in class and have them record it on their device if they have a device. It really depends on digital access, of course, but there are ways to make it happen so you can get the information you need. And I would have them then doing the writing, the reading, in different groups, the listening, and then make sure everybody gets a chance to do all of them, all the different skills. So it's just organized in the classroom.
Mhm.
And by the way, what I
Yeah,
noticed when I was in
absolutely.
Cameroon, I would definitely be grouping students into all the time, all the time, and then having different groups work on different things, because and I'd move them around constantly, because what I noticed is the students at the front of the classroom actually could hear me, and the students in the back of the classroom could never hear me. So I had to move around within that classroom. And when I did, it helped improve their behavior. So they weren't talking at the back of the classroom or doing other things. So I'm moving around, just making sure they're doing what they need to do. And so, yeah, I would constantly be using that as a classroom management strategy.
Exactly, exactly. I love that you mentioned classroom management because I'm seeing the question in the chat, and I think this has to do with class management and also time management. Somebody is saying,
Mm-hmm.
suppose that time devoted to the lesson is over before assessment happens. What should the teacher do? The
Yes.
teacher is in charge, right? So let's hear from you. Yeah.
So when we take a day or so, a class session or two, to gather this information, we make it up later from the lessons because we don't have to spend so much time on things that we don't need to work on. So we can take that out, or we can reduce down what we work on because we know the students know this and they're good at this. So it helps us later save time. So the strategy really is use that up at the beginning to find out what they really need to work on, and then reduce the time of the things they don't later on. And that way you can really get to the things you need to be able to do.
Exactly.
So
Exactly.
it's a strange
Absolutely.
organizational management approach, but it does work.
Exactly. Thank you so very much, Dr. Kate Reynolds. It's been a wonderful moment with you tonight. Thank you so much. There's no better time for us to have heard such a topic as this. Thank you. And I'm sure that the teachers that are here today are ready to implement all that they've learned from this webinar in their various classrooms. And we look forward to hearing from you in our WhatsApp and Telegram platforms. If you have questions, you can go on and share on the platforms. And if you have contributions, ideas, experiences to share with us about your needs assessment strategies, you can also put that in the WhatsApp or Telegram platforms. So thank you so very much for joining us, Dr. Kate, once again. And thank you, everybody, Dancing and Letitia from the PD team, and every one of you. Thank you so very much. Mr. President is here, Mr. Vice President, members of the Africa Elta Board. I see you here. Thank you, everybody. And do have a splendid week ahead. Thank you. Have a good night. Bye
Thank you
bye.
all. Bye bye.
Yeah, bye.